The moment you finally let go of this pain, something shifts, right when you stop chasing them, and somehow they always feel it. What comes next is the cruelest twist you never expected. You spent months trying to get noticed, months typing out the right words, months showing up for them, months holding your patience, months questioning what was wrong with you, and none of it worked. Nothing pulled them closer, nothing made them lean toward you. But the instant you gave up, the instant something inside you quietly whispered enough, everything shifted, and not in the way you were hoping for, but in a way built, whether they realized it or not, to drag you straight back into the same loop you had just broken free from. This is the last cruel trick. And by the time we finish, you will fully understand why they do this, what goes on inside them when it happens, and most importantly, what it means for you and what your next move should be. Before we continue, if you have ever felt exactly this, if you have ever come so close to freedom only to be yanked back at the final moment, type the word free in the comments below. Just free. And if you want to understand the psychology behind every confusing move an avoidant partner has ever made toward you, hit subscribe because this channel dives deep into exactly this kind of thing. Now let's get into what is actually going on. First, you need to understand something about the avoidant mind that most people never fully grasp. Avoidant people do not view relationships the way you do. When you are in a relationship, or even just some kind of emotional bond with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, you are coming from a place where closeness equals safety. For you, being near someone you care about is the whole point. It is where you belong. It feels right. But for them, closeness does not feel safe at all. It feels like danger, not because they are damaged, not because they are cruel people, but because their nervous system learned early on that getting too close to someone eventually means losing themselves. Somewhere back in their childhood, someone close to them, a parent, a guardian, someone who should have been their safe place, taught them that needing others only leads to letdown, that opening up leads to being pushed away, that relying on someone means getting hurt. So they built barriers, tall ones, and over time those barriers became who they are. But here is the problem with barriers. They only serve one purpose. They keep things out. And for a long stretch, those barriers worked just fine. The avoidants stayed distant. They felt safe and in control. They never let anyone get too close. Or they handled their feelings simply by not letting themselves feel much at all, at least not on a conscious level. And they moved through relationships following a very specific pattern. They would let you in just enough to spark something, just enough to make you feel special. Then, once things got serious, once real depth started forming, once you started asking for more, they would retreat. Not always in some big dramatic way, sometimes just a little. Slightly less responsive, slightly cooler, a bit more distant. And you, someone who genuinely values connection, would naturally step closer to bridge that gap, and they would step back again, and you would move in a little more. This dance, this draining, confusing, painful back and forth kept going with you, putting in more and more effort to hold on to something they were quietly letting slip away. Meanwhile, through all of this, while you were leaning in, while you kept trying, sending those late-night texts, replaying every conversation, wondering what you might be doing wrong, they were feeling something very particular. They felt at ease. Not warmth exactly, more like familiarity. You were predictable. You were reachable. In the language their nervous system understood, you were contained, you weren't going anywhere, so they didn't have to move either. That is the unspoken calculation running inside an avoidant person when someone is chasing them. Your pursuit itself signals safety to them, not emotional closeness, but relational security, meaning this person is still here, meaning I don't have to do anything. I can stay comfortably distant and still keep this connection whenever I feel like reaching for it. So they kept you just out of reach, and you kept reaching until the day you stopped. Maybe it happened slowly. Maybe there was one specific moment. Maybe you simply woke up one day and something inside you had shifted, something quieter, something that had finally accepted what your mind had been resisting for so long, that things weren't going to change, that they were not suddenly going to become the partner you had been hoping for, that the relationship you pictured was mostly something you had built inside your own imagination, and something inside you released. It is a very specific kind of release. It isn't anger, not at first anyway. It feels more like exhaustion finally making peace with itself. It is like a muscle that has been tense for months finally letting go. It is quiet, a little heavy with sadness. But underneath that sadness, if you're honest, there is also relief. You stopped chasing. You stopped refreshing your phone every few minutes. You stopped crafting the perfect message meant to crack them open. You stopped waiting around. Slowly, you started turning your focus back to yourself. And that is exactly when they feel it. Don't underestimate this moment. Avoidant people are incredibly tuned into the emotional shifts happening around them. Not because they're deeply empathetic in the usual sense, although some are, but because their nervous system is always scanning for changes in the emotional landscape around them. It's a survival instinct. When you learn early on that closeness is dangerous, you become hyper-aware of every shift in how people relate to you. You get really skilled at picking up on subtle changes in someone's energy, and the moment you stopped caring, they picked up on it. Not necessarily on a conscious level, not always something they could put into words, but something registered, something changed. Their nervous system, which had been perfectly comfortable with you chasing them, suddenly found itself somewhere unfamiliar. You were no longer available in the way you used to be, no longer predictable, no longer contained. And for the first time in this entire pattern, they felt something they are deeply uncomfortable feeling. They felt you slipping away. Now here is where things get psychologically interesting, because you might be thinking, okay, good, they finally noticed me pulling away. Maybe now they'll appreciate what they had. Maybe now they'll finally step up. Maybe we can finally have that real conversation we should have had months ago. And the truth is, maybe, but probably not the way you're hoping, because an avoidant person doesn't react to the fear of loss the way someone secure would. A securely attached person, sensing a relationship slipping, tends to move toward the problem. They start the hard conversation, they allow themselves to be vulnerable, they lay their feelings out. They say something like, look, I can feel things shifting and I'm scared of losing you. Can we talk about this? An avoidant person does something completely different. They pull out the final cruel trick. And there are actually a few different versions of this trick. They all stem from the same root, but they show up in different ways depending on the person and the circumstances. Let's go through each one, because understanding them is the only real way to protect yourself. The first version is the sudden return. After days, weeks, sometimes even months of distance, they come back warm, present, fully available. The version of them you always wished for finally shows up. They text first, they're engaged, they're funny, sweet, easy to talk to. The conversation flows the way it always should have. They bring up old inside jokes. They send something that proves they've been thinking about you. They say things like, I've been thinking about us, or I miss talking to you, or I know I haven't been around much. And your heart does exactly what you told yourself it wouldn't do. It opens right back up, because this is the version of them you caught glimpses of before. This is the potential you've been clinging to. This is proof that what you felt was real, and it was real. That part isn't the trick. The trick is the timing. They didn't come back because they had some big realization. They didn't come back because they finally did the inner work. They came back because you started to fade, and their attachment system, which had been perfectly happy keeping its distance while you were available, suddenly got triggered by your absence. There's a term in psychology for this. It's called the anxiety of loss. It's a different thing from truly wanting closeness with someone. You can desperately want to avoid losing something while still being unwilling or unable to actually give that thing what it needs. And that's exactly what's happening here. They don't suddenly crave intimacy. They suddenly cannot stand the thought of losing access to you. So they show up just enough to switch your hope back on, just enough to rebuild that emotional thread between you. And once they feel secure again, once they sense you're back in your familiar spot of reaching toward them, they slowly drift back to their old distance, and the whole cycle starts over. The second version of this final cruel trick is what I like to call the vulnerability bomb. It works especially well on people who are naturally empathetic, and if you've spent time chasing an avoidant, chances are that's exactly who you are. The vulnerability bomb happens when they suddenly crack open. They tell you something real, something painful, something they claim they've never shared with anyone before. They let you pass the wall in a way that feels monumental. Maybe they open up about their past, an old childhood wound, a fear they've been carrying, a regret they've never spoken about, and they hand it to you. It feels like a breakthrough. It feels like this is finally the moment, the closeness you've been waiting for this whole time. And you respond exactly how an empathetic person would. You hold their words carefully. You make them feel understood. You reassure them. You open up too in return, and suddenly the two of you are in this tender, rare space you've been longing for since this connection began. And it is real. Their vulnerability is genuine. The pain they're revealing is genuine. But once again, the timing is the trick. They aren't opening up because they've decided they truly want intimacy. They're opening up because your pulling away triggered something like a relational emergency inside their nervous system. The vulnerability bomb is, in a sense, their emergency response, their system's fastest route back into your emotional investment. I want to be careful here, because I'm not claiming they're consciously scheming against you. Most of the time, they aren't. Most of the time, this isn't some calculated plan. It's an unconscious reflex. Their nervous system finds whatever works and does it without any deliberate decision, without weighing it out. The part of them that can't handle relational loss finds the lever that pulls you back in, and it pulls it. But regardless of their intention, the effect on you stays the same. You get drawn back in, your hope reignites, your investment comes flooding back. And once the emergency has passed for them, they return right back to their usual setting. The third version is the jealousy play. This one leans slightly more calculated, though it's often still partly unconscious. They suddenly become visible again. They start posting more. They bring up someone new in conversation. They seem busier, more social, like they suddenly have options you never knew about. They don't push it aggressively. They keep it casual enough to make you wonder, did they move on? Are they seeing someone else now? Was I really nothing to them? And this taps into something deeply old in the human brain, the scarcity effect. We want most what we believe we're on the verge of losing. And suddenly the person you had started letting go of is back, filling your thoughts completely. Not because you love them more now, but because some primal part of your brain sensed competition and spiraled into complete irrationality. Here's the painful truth about the jealousy play. It works, not because you're weak or naive, but because you're human, because your nervous system developed in a world where losing a bonded partner was a real threat to survival. What gets triggered isn't just emotional, it's biological. It skips your rational thinking entirely and hits straight at the primitive part of your brain. And suddenly you're doing exactly what you had just worked so hard to stop doing. You're reaching out again, you're re-engaging, you're right back in pursuit mode. And they, having successfully proven you're still around, feel that familiar wave of relational security wash over them again, and they settle right back into their comfortable distance. The fourth version is the crisis. Something goes wrong in their world, or they claim it does. A health scare, family trouble, a rough patch at work, some difficult moment they're going through, and they reach out to you. Not necessarily saying they need you outright, sometimes just mentioning it in passing, sometimes just letting it slip into the conversation. And you, someone who cares about them, who's spent months trying to show up for them, can't just turn your back on someone going through real pain. That would feel wrong. It would feel like betraying who you actually are. So you show up, you offer comfort, you're warm, kind, and present, and they can feel it. For a moment, their walls drop a little, and you feel connected, and it feels real. And it is real. But again, the timing isn't a coincidence. Their nervous system picked up on your withdrawal and found a legitimate excuse for you to come back around. Not always on purpose. Sometimes the crisis really is genuine, and their reaching out is sincere. But the fact that they reached specifically toward you, instead of anyone else in their life, is often a sign of the relational alarm your distance set off. And once you've shown up, once they've felt your care again, once the emergency has passed, they won't suddenly open up more. They won't follow through with deeper connection or honesty. They'll slide right back into being distant. And you'll end up right back where you started, except now you've given away even more of yourself. The fifth version, and maybe the quietest and cruelest of them all, is what I call the mirror move. This is when they start doing exactly what you had been doing. When you were the available one, they stayed distant. Now that you're becoming distant, suddenly they become available. Not in some obvious dramatic way you could point to and say, look, that's exactly what's happening, but in all the small ways. They respond quicker, they reach out more, they seem genuinely interested, they remember little things you mentioned, they check in on you, and from the outside it looks like growth. It looks like they're finally becoming what you always needed. And part of you starts thinking, maybe I should stay, maybe this is the turning point. Maybe pulling back finally showed them what they were about to lose. And here's the hardest thing I'll say to you today. That might actually be true. That could genuinely be the start of something different. For some avoidant people, truly facing the possibility of losing someone does create a real shift, does spark a willingness to do the work, does lead to genuine change. But you can't know that yet. And honestly, neither can they, because not wanting to lose you isn't the same thing as being ready to give you what you actually need. Until they've done the real inner work, the therapy, the self-reflection, the honest confrontation of their own patterns, any change you're seeing will stay fragile. It'll be situational. It'll be driven by fear, not real growth. And the moment that fear fades, because you're back, because you're available again, because the threat of losing you is gone, the old patterns will return. This isn't pessimism. This isn't saying people can't change, because people absolutely can. But real change takes consistent, intentional, sustained effort over time. It doesn't happen in 2 weeks just because someone got scared, at least not change that actually lasts. So, what do you do with all of this? What do you do while you're right in the middle of it? When you've finally started detaching, when you've started to feel something like peace, and then the message comes through, or the sudden vulnerability, or the unexpected warmth, or the jealousy trigger, or the crisis. What do you actually do? The first step is naming it, not out loud to them, just to yourself. You name exactly what's happening. You say, internally, I understand what this really is. I see clearly why it's happening. This isn't them turning into who I needed them to be. This is just their nervous system reacting to my absence. Those are two entirely different things. Naming it doesn't mean turning cold. It doesn't mean shutting off your feelings. It doesn't mean you care less for them or that none of it mattered. It simply means you're seeing things clearly now, and seeing clearly is the only thing protecting you right now because the pullback is going to be powerful. I want you to grasp just how powerful, because it isn't only emotional, it's physical too. Your own attachment system will react to their renewed attention with a rush of chemicals in your brain. Dopamine, oxytocin, the same chemistry as early love, will fire up all over again. It's going to feel like proof. It's going to feel like confirmation that this connection is worth holding on to, and it will be misleading you. Not about whether the connection itself was real, it may well have been, but about whether this particular moment reflects actual change, because your brain cannot tell the difference between true growth and a temporary spike in someone's avoidant attachment system. Your brain simply registers that they're here, that they feel warm, that you feel the way you used to feel, and something inside says, yes, this is right. So instead, you need to lean on your mind. You need to use the part of you capable of noticing patterns across time, rather than just reacting to the feeling of the moment. And the pattern tells you this. An avoidant person, one who hasn't examined or worked through their attachment style, will want you most when you're least reachable and want you least when you're most reachable. That's the heart of the pattern. Everything else is just a variation of it, which means if you go back without anything truly having shifted, you're not stepping into a new relationship, you're stepping back into the exact same one, just with a short burst of warmth before it settles back into what it always was. The second thing to do is hold steady. Not with anger, not with a big speech, not with some ultimatum thrown out in a moment of reaction. Hold steady quietly. Respond with warmth, but not instantly. Stay engaged, but not overly intense. Don't give them the cold shoulder. Don't try to punish them. Simply don't abandon the process of detachment you've already begun. Because here's what most people end up doing once the avoidant comes back around. They swing straight from cold distance into full, intense availability. And that tells the avoidant's nervous system the danger has completely passed, letting them slide right back into their usual distance. What you want instead is to hold on to the energy you found while detaching. The calmer energy, the less desperate energy, the energy of someone who will be fine either way this turns out. Not as some tactic or manipulation, but because that's genuinely who you need to become, for your own sake. Someone who is truly fine whether or not this particular person ever shows up fully for them. And if you're still working toward that, that's okay too. That is the work itself. You don't need to have fully arrived there to hold a little ground today.